So as mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about DVT, Distributed Validator Technology. We're also going to talk a bit about where Lido as a liquid staking protocol has been over the last year, and really where it's going now over the next few months. So I'm Will. I'm a contributor to the Node Operator Mechanisms workstream. This is the workstream of the DAO that's responsible for helping the DAO basically interface with node operators. Traditionally, this is the curated node operator set, but more recently, this has also taken form with many solo stakers and community stakers as well. So for those of you that don't know, Lido is a liquid staking protocol on Ethereum, currently with over 9.7 million ETH staked via the protocol. Lido is a middleware, so it connects users that want to stake with node operators. It's completely software driven, and it's governed fully on-chain by the Lido DAO, so all code changes basically go through an on-chain Aragon vote. All right, so to kick this off, I think it's really, really important to talk about where Lido was a year ago, so you have the context on how DVT has really changed things. So if any of you were on crypto Twitter a year ago, you would have had plenty of drama around Lido, right? There was only 29 node operators that were onboarded via these periodic application windows. So I've been a contributor to the DAO now for about 2.5 years. And from my earliest conversations with DAO members, contributors to the DAO, it was very, very clear. There's always been this unrelenting focus on decentralization. From the earliest days, it was clear that having solo stakers participate in the protocol was the goal. About a year ago, that wasn't the case. There was 29 node operators. Now, I will say, I think at this time, there's no question in my mind that Lido is and was the most decentralized at-scale staking provider that there was. It had better consensus layer client diversity than any other protocol, and basically than the entire Ethereum network. There was no country with more than 20% of Lido-related validators, excluding Germany, and that's improved quite a bit. And in May of last year, there was a very important change that happened. So there was the introduction of what's called the staking router. And the staking router changed the architecture of the protocol from something that's monolithic to more modular. And that is really what's driven a lot of the change and improvement that we're going to talk about here. One thing I want to call out, because this is always sort of a point of discussion, but node operators themselves are completely independent entities. The Lido DAO does not run a single validator for the protocol itself. As someone who basically is talking to these node operators every day, I can tell you it takes quite a bit of effort just to get a form filled most of the time. There's no ability to tell these people to do anything with their infrastructure. And actually, many of the Ethereum client teams are actually Lido node operators as well. One of the things I've always really appreciated about Lido is transparency, and I think this really stems from the fact that Lido is a fully on-chain and mechanism. So there's a few things I want to touch on. First is the Lido Validator and Node Operator metrics report, and so this is a quarterly report that basically covers everything related to the infrastructure. So the data is sourced from the node operators themselves. This covers things like their consensus layer and execution layer client diversity. It covers things like where they're running infrastructure. So are people running out of home nodes? Are they running in the cloud? What cloud provider? Are they running in bare metal? What countries, et cetera? And so all of this is reported and shown to the community. One thing I think that's also really cool, and this is very different than many of the centralized exchanges, for example, is that all validator keys are publicly mapped. So if you want to figure out if a validator belongs to Lido, you can do that in about 30 seconds. You can do it on chain, but you can also just look at a bunch of the interfaces, and popular resources like Beacon Chain have all Lido validators mapped. I touched on this, but all of the policies and proposals to the DAO are community driven. So there's a really vibrant discussion taking place on the Lido research forums where all changes, all suggestions to the protocol are discussed. There's also something here that's called the Lido on Ethereum scorecard. And I think this is really, really cool and quite different than, not even just most Web 2 or Web 3 things, but Web 2 also. So basically there's a very small little screenshot there in the, bottom right. But this is basically something that the contributors put together with feedback from the community on areas basically that are scored. So for example, how is Lido doing in terms of node operator decentralization? What I think is really cool about this, there's a bunch of aspects that are actually we're not doing very well here. There's a lot of issues here. This could use some improvement. Or this isn't looking so great, but we have a path to improvement. So I think this is quite differentiated. I mentioned this, but all governance happens on chain, either via snapshot first for more qualitative policies, but all code changes go through on-chain vote. And then there's also something called Easy Track, which is used for more routine governance operations. So really bringing this home to where Lido was a year ago. At this time, there was only 29 node operators. Also, 78% of the validators that are utilizing the protocol were running the execution layer client Geth. This was actually down about 8% year over year. It was recognized as an issue, but still, it was too much. Also, at the time, there was no permissionless entry to the protocol, and there was no solo or community stakers. And I mentioned this, but if you were on crypto Twitter a year ago, you would have seen this basically every day for weeks and weeks and weeks. But I think there's been a really, really big change. It started last fall with something that's called Hasu's proposed Goose Goals to the Lido DAO. And there was three-year goals, the second of which is what we're going to focus on, and that's that Lido should attract the best validator set in Ethereum. That includes key results like permissionless entry to the protocol, reaching 5,000 node operators, having a performance effectiveness rating in the 80th percentile, and designing the protocol for risk mitigation by design, and having a free market for validation. That was quickly followed by 2 snapshot votes that basically introduced the idea of, first off, the Simple DVT module, and then second, the community staking module. So we'll start with Simple DVT, and if you know me at all, this has been something I've been very focused on, and I can talk to you guys about it all day long. And you know, we're lucky here to have a bunch of SSV folks in the crowd, so I'll be followed by them, and you'll hear more about DVT. But basically, Simple DVT was the second module that was added to the protocol. And the main differentiator here, it actually was the exact same code base with very, very minor modifications from the curated node operator registry. But the difference here is that it uses clusters instead of individual node operators. That is because it utilizes this technology, Distributed Validator Technology, which is developed by 2 main providers, OBOL and SSV Network. All right, so for those of you that don't know what DVT is, I think the easiest way to understand this is it's like a multi-sig, but instead like a wallet, right? It's for a validator. And this adds a lot of different advantages. So if you think of a normal Ethereum validator, you have an execution layer client, you have a consensus layer client, a validator client, and your beacon node. And maybe you're running this from your house, you're in Bulgaria, you're exposed to your internet provider. If the internet goes down, you're going to miss some attestations. And at a small scale, this really isn't a big issue. But if you were gone from your home for a month, it is kind of an issue. So the difference here with DVT is it uses threshold cryptography. And in the case of Lido, all of our clusters run with 7 people. You could also do this with a 3 out of 4, a 7 out of 10. You could go bigger, but those are the most common. But in this 5 of 7 threshold, right, only 5 of the 7 nodes need to be online for the validator to actually attest. And that's a pretty cool thing, because 2 people, that means, could be offline, they're still receiving rewards, and your validators are still online. What's also really, really cool from the perspective of a liquid staking protocol here is there's a ton of benefits to resilience, to decentralization, and key security. I'm going to double click on key security very quickly because there's a lot of people that claim benefits from DVT, but they aren't actually using distributed key generation for their key security. If anyone tells you they're using DVT, ask them if you're using DKG with DVT. This allows for the creation of the keys to be split across multiple parties so that no one person ever has the full private key. It's a huge innovation. It drastically improves the security of the validator. All right, so talking about these benefits, right? So we talked about the example of the single validator, but now in this DVT configuration, you have 5 or 7 different nodes. Every single person could be using basically a different execution layer client, a different consensus layer client. All of them could be in a different country around the world, subject to different regulatory aspects, for example. All of these people are using different kinds of infrastructure, so some are in the cloud, some are running from home, some are running from bare metal. And all of a sudden, at this single validator level, you have such a distributed and decentralized piece of infrastructure that is incredibly resilient and performant. We're going to talk more about that. So the module launched in February, and since that time, it's facilitated the addition of over 140 solo and community stakers to the protocol. There's now nodes running on every single continent except for Antarctica via Simple DVT. And so initially, Simple DVT launched with a 0.5% share limit. And if you consider the size of Lido, that is fairly significant. But given the early success, the DAO voted about 3-4 months ago to increase that target share to 4%. So for perspective, 4% of Ethereum staked via Lido is equivalent to over 12,000 validators. That's 1.14% of all Ethereum validators. And that's going to be run by 72 normal clusters. So these are clusters with 7 participants. They're made up of professionals, solo stakers, community stakers. Community stakers are basically solo stakers that work with their friends. And they're going to run at least 80 validators per cluster. There's also 10 superclusters, and these superclusters followed an evaluation round basically by the Lido Node Operator Subgovernance Group. That then went to the DAO. There was a proposal, but these clusters are mostly filled with professional node operators. But there's actually solo stakers in these clusters too, and I think this is very differentiated versus many of the other staking protocols which are using DVT. They basically have a pool of 10 node operators. They're all professional, running all their validators. These superclusters actually have solo stakers in them. So Simple DVT in 2024 is expected to facilitate the addition of 300 plus net new stakers in total to the Lido protocol. And 2024 is almost done, and we're not far off. There's another thing that's basically related to this that I want to touch on, and this is a vault that was launched by Mello, who's a member of the Lido Alliance. And this is a kind of interesting thing because it basically directs net new stake to the Simple DVT module. This is doing multiple things, but like the most important thing it's doing is really furthering the decentralization of the protocol. Users put stake to this vault, it stakes it to the protocol, and that stake goes to the Simple DVT module. This is allowing solo stakers and community stakers to run validators faster. It's allowing for users to participate in running validators and decentralizing Lido, which is decentralizing Ethereum through this much quicker. And it's also, there's a proposal right now that's currently live on Snapshot Vote to also incorporate the community staking module. We're going to talk about that. From a user perspective, the other thing that's pretty cool here, so users receive points, I know, terrible, from SSV, from Obol, and from Mello. But I think there's like one kind of interesting thing here. So SSV already exists. You can go find that token, look at it, it exists, it's not fluff. Obol has many validators currently running in the Simple DVT module. And over the next 6 months, Obol and SSV will have an equal amount. But Obol currently has more. And Obol points are generated by the number of validators running. Because there's so much more stake in validators running in the Simple DVT module, there's currently a 9x point boost just based on the math of the amount of validators in the protocol versus the vault. So it's interesting to look at. Stakers, I just want to call this out, should not unstake staked ETH or wrap staked ETH on the base chain on Ethereum mainnet if they want to receive these points. Because the goal of this is to add net new validators to the protocol that are allowing community stakers, that are allowing solo stakers to come in, run validators, and decentralize Lido. Okay, so we talked about where we were. Let's talk about the impact of DVT. So today, there are now 235 independent node operators using the Lido protocol to run validators. That's up 710% year over year. It's huge improvement, right? We went from 29 to 235, and it's not stopping. That number will be over 300 in the next 2 months. My favorite stat on this slide is actually that 53% of that 235 are solo and community stakers running validators via Lido. I think that's incredible progress. There was a testnet that just finished with Obol 2 months ago. The proposal to onboard cohort 3 is just been accepted, so there's 36 net new node operators that are onboarding next week, and there's an SSV testnet that's ongoing with another 90 spots open. So these numbers are very achievable to go over 300 this year. And there's also a slide at the bottom left. I mentioned Geth and how the utilization of Geth was over 78% a year ago. It's now actually, it's actually less than 40%, and last quarter was flipped by Nethermind for the first time. It's a really significant improvement. I think that Lido has had, from a protocol perspective, a ton of progress, and it's very hard to argue that there's any other liquid staking protocol or staking protocol in general at scale that is more decentralized. But Simple DVT is really cool. It's kind of what's happened over the last year. Now what I really want to talk to you about is what it's, I think, like, incredibly exciting, and it's the story of Lido over the next few years. That's permissionless staking with Lido. And this is going to be facilitated by something called the community staking module. But this is going to allow for anyone in the entire world to run a validator via Lido without ever having to talk to a single person. It's completely permissionless. And I think from a user experience perspective, it's an incredible product. So I talked about this. It's permissionless. And this is really important, right? It's true to the ethos. If you run an Ethereum validator as a solo staker, which really is the gold standard, right? You're running a node at home, you have the full 32 ETH, it's your validator, you're not touching a liquid staking protocol or any other staking protocol. It's completely permissionless. And this was not an option with Lido. Even with Simple DVT, you had to go through a testnet. And it was quite easy to do as long as you basically paid attention. But it wasn't permissionless, and so this is a big improvement. There is a bond, and the bond is basically just ETH that you keep on the side. This is to prevent MEV stealing, or if your validator was to go offline for a very long time. If you go to the Lido docs, you can understand more about this. But basically, this is quite similar to the mechanism that exists with Rocket Pool. So there's two different categories here. So the module had a testnet. We're going to talk about that. And basically, there's an early access period for people to participate. If you have early access, which also would be, you'd also be included if you're running a mainnet validator today in any other liquid staking protocol, any other, basically like by yourself. This is data collected by Rated and by StakeCat as well. But basically, then it's 1.5 ETH to participate for your first validator. Your second validator is only 1.3. If you are not on that early access list, then it's 2.4 ETH for your first validator, and then it's 1.3 ETH for each validator after that. So this has brought the accessibility of running Ethereum validators to an incredibly different level than any other option on the market. So we'll talk more about when you can start, but it's really soon. Third is rewards, and this is important because you need to buy hardware or you need to pay for a cloud provider to run this, right? This is really, really interesting. So the APR multiplier, and the APR multiplier is basically considering the staking rewards rate that you get for running a validator, is up to 2.37 times, because the 32 ETH required for your validator is fully delegated to the validator, and your bond sits on the side, but it's actually also held in staked ETH. There's execution layer and consensus layer reward smoothing. You're benefiting, especially on the EL side, from being a member of the largest validator set on Ethereum. And here's the really interesting thing, I think, for people that aren't super experienced. There's this performance threshold. And the performance threshold basically means that if you were to go offline for a day or so, you would actually still receive full rewards if within the 28-day snapshot periods, you were staying online the whole time. This is a pretty cool mechanism, and that means if your power goes out, you don't have to freak out that you've just basically wasted a month of work. Number 4 is that the user experience for using the community staking module, I think is hard to argue that it's not the best in staking. Lido has benefited here by being one of the latter to launch a product that has, or like an ability for people to access permissionless staking. And this has really, really meant that anyone that looks at this basically says the UI is great, but more importantly than that, the user experience is great. So we had this testnet, I mentioned it, we're not going to spend a ton of time here. There was over 2,600 node operator entries that participated. There was quite a few Sybils that were farming something. 300 unique entities at least identified within that. Almost 5,000 validators, and that was all just within 3 months. Cool. Mainnet, November 2024. The on-chain Aragon vote to deploy this is happening this coming week. That'll start the early access period if the DAO does vote to approve it, though they have approved multiple snapshot votes before this. And basically, this is incredibly exciting. Fully permissionless, Q1 2025. But next week, if you're already running a validator on mainnet as a solo staker, you can participate fully permissionlessly. After that, anyone in the world in Q1, probably January, February, will be running validators permissionlessly via Lido. Okay, so wrapping this up, I talked about this path to 5,000 independent node operators. This is going to happen with 3 main things. First is the launch and growth of the community staking module. This is the most accessible product for anyone that is interested in utilizing Ethereum to run validators, and especially using Lido to run validators. There is an incredible user experience here. I'm telling you, if you compare it to all of the other options in the market, it's taking the best features of those. There's been years of research and consideration, and I really think that it's hard to argue that there's going to be something better here. Number 2 is the continued expansion of the Simple DVT module. So there's more cohorts onboarding, there's more net new participants coming to the protocol to run validators, and I think this is something that has brought Lido from a very professional, only orgs participating from the curated module to something now where there's hundreds of people participating, there's solo stakers, any single person in this room could participate, right? I'm not a technical person, but the benefits of DVT are very, very numerous. And what's also really cool is that with CSM, you can also run DVT. So you can go find your friends, you can set up a cluster via SSV, via Obol, and you can also use different tools like DAppNode or Stereo or Sedge to participate. Third and finally on this, there's also the potential for modules in the future. Now, these will have to go through the DAO governance process. There will be proposals. There will be long discussions. But I think it's really, really easy to think about something that combines the best of Simple DVT and the best of community staking module. Imagine being able to go to SSV or Obol without having to talk to a single person, set up a cluster, and run validators via Lido. This is, I think, a huge improvement in terms of the protocol's decentralization. I think it's truly good for Ethereum, and the best part is that it's not ending. There's going to be thousands of node operators running validators via the protocol over the next couple of years with the launch of CSM, with the scaling of Simple DVT, and with the potential for other modules. So thanks very much.